Welcome to another episode of Cadence Fishing TV. And today we're on the River Severn at Upton and I'm with my great friend Colin Harvey. Colin, tell us a bit about the stretch.
Yeah, we're on a stretch today known as Upton-upon-Severn, famous for roach, famous for bream. Target fish today are going to be bream, mid-river, ground bait feeder, and our backstop today is going to be roach. We'll fish a bollow or something for roach as a bit of a backstop, but I'm confident that we're going to catch bream today. The river looks perfect, plenty of colour, up about a foot, so it's absolutely bang on.
Yeah, I've even seen a few fish topping, so I'm really excited to get stuck in.
Let's go for it, mate.
Should we do it?
Let's go for it.
I've had 5 or 6 quick casts with a bigger feeder and just casters, and I've just gone onto a medium-sized feeder and started putting a bit of chopped worm in, and this is my first bite and it looks like a skimmer or a hybrid. I took this one on 3 maggots. That's not a bad start. Skimmer around about £1. A lot of times when I'm bream fishing on rivers and lakes, I like to start by not feeding any chopped worm, just casters. Try and get a good amount of bait in before I actually really start catching, and often chopped worm can be such a powerful trigger to the fish that it just means that you can hopefully get some bait out there to hold the fish before you actually start catching any. Colin informs me the swim's around about 12 foot deep, and I started off with a 70-gram feeder which was holding the bottom really easy, so I've now gone to a smaller 40-gram feeder, and with a small bow in the line that's holding really well. So it does pay to change and get the right balanced feeder so that it's just holding in the flow. And the bite off that skimmer was a classic drop back, so it had obviously hooked itself, dislodged the feeder, and the fish was on. You'll also notice that I'm casting slightly upstream, maybe about 2 or 3 meters upstream, so that I can place the feeder in a similar spot every cast, feel it to the bottom, and then by the fact that it's just in front of me, be able to create a nice bow so that I'm not pulling the feeder away and dislodging it. Everything's settling nicely and hopefully stopping in a similar position. Well, here comes a big chub. Colin mentioned about the barges that are working the river at the moment, and as you can see they're quite substantial and probably churning up some of the sediment with all the wash and as they go by, so that's probably putting a bit of colour into the water, which hopefully going to help when we're bream fishing. So it's quite a big river down here, and that can be a bit daunting, especially if we're fishing the river for the first time. Even with just a foot of water on like today, the river's really quite powerful, and it does require a bit of thought and some specialised tackle as well if you're going to fish effectively. It seems from Colin that the river here is just a classic channel with some very pronounced ledges on this side and the far side of the river, and obviously there'll be some deep holes and submerged islands in different places, but so far on this peg it just seems to be fairly flat and even on the bottom. On certain days, in certain conditions, it pays to fish over towards the far bank, particularly when the river's low and clear. But today, with this extra water and colour, I feel that fishing just down the middle like we are, like we've started, should be about right. You've almost got to imagine the bream shoals in the river moving up and down the stretch during the day, and we want to intercept them and hopefully hold them. And those bream shoals are probably going to be moving through the peg, perhaps a third out down the middle, and that's why we want to set a trap to stop them. By regular feeding, casting with the feeder and putting in lots of bait, hopefully we'll be able to do that.
As predicted, best part of an hour in now, and the last two casts produced two fish, roach half a pound and a bream pound and a quarter. I'm expecting some bigger fish to come on in the next hour or so. One good tip when you're fishing the lower Severn is to be very smooth with your casting. It's a huge river, right, and I try to get it really smooth. I don't fish to a clip, and so the whole cast is lovely and smooth, just targeting over the river, middle of the river. Let the feeder gently go to the bottom, and I've got some probably 2-3 yards of slack line now, which the current's going to take up. And you'll notice that I've put in the rod fairly high up in the air. I'm looking for drop back bites. Cadence 13-foot number 3 rod is the rod that I'm using. It's got a number 2 2-ounce tip in it, and for today it's absolutely spot on for this type of river. You will notice that I'm fishing actually about 35 metres out. I'm targeting that line purely because it's the main channel of the River Severn. We get huge boat traffic, barges, you know, there's one actually coming up the river now, and they all tend to sort of be in that channel there, and it's slightly deeper. I would say probably 2 foot deeper, and it's generally where the bream lie. When we've got an extra 2 foot of water, you can't fish it. It's almost impossible without 5 or 6 ounces of lead, and you have to come a little bit closer. But when it's possible to fish in that channel, that's where I stick most of the time, and it usually pays dividends. As I mentioned before, you can see that the chub barge, as it's known as, is actually going up that boat channel, exactly where my feeder's landing. and they don't scare the fish. The fish have got used to them over the years. So that's the channel that you need to fish in. When anglers come and fish the lower Severn, they usually make one or two mistakes. And one of the mistakes they do make definitely is not to fish far enough out into that boat channel like I've just cast. And the other mistake they make, that you've got to nail the bottom on this river. It's a big river, it's 12, 13 foot deep, and anglers tend to use very light feeders and they bounce all over the river. So a real good tip is to put 2 ounces of lead on, even if you don't need it at times. Nail it to the bottom, use a big feeder, put plenty of bait in it. The river can take loads and loads of bait. You haven't got to be frugal with bait. And you need to lay the carpet down for when the bream arrive, and when they arrive you can have an absolute birthday. If we focus on the 2 feeders that I like on the lower Severn, there are 2 sizes. The bigger one is an extra large. That one's actually kitted out with a 50 gram lead on it, and the slightly smaller one, which is classed as a large feeder, has 65 gram lead on it. Now it's so important that you do fish with that lead, as I reiterated before. You always need quite a few of these feeders on the lower Severn as well. There are a lot of snags down this neck of the woods. And the reason we've got a lot of fish, I always say, is because we've got a lot of snags. So, kit yourselves out with 2 feeders, extra large and large, put plenty of bait in, target the middle channel, and hey presto, you should be in for a few bream. You will notice that the tip I've got in there, that number 2 tip, 2 ounce, has only got a slight bend in it. I'm looking for drop back bites mostly. And there you go, there's a little indication then, look, but not a proper drop back bite. I would ignore that, and when you get a real bite, that will completely drop back. You don't want a tip with a huge curve in the top of the rod, because you just will not get those drop back bites the same, and you won't connect with the fish. But the Cadence number 3 13 foot rod comes with 3 tips, and it's key to get the right tip for the right conditions. This is a big river, fairly big flow on it, and today, with roughly 2.5 ounces of lead on the feeder, the 2 ounce tip is absolutely perfect. I see an awful lot of complicated rigs. You will notice on my rig that I've got 2 stops, rubber stops, and the feeder just literally runs between the 2 stops. The top stop is very easily movable, so you can slide up and down and vary that. I like that because should we get a big fish that breaks you, it can easily lose the feeder. It can pull that off quite quickly, and it's not towing a feed around. It's simple twizzle below there, below the bottom stop, with a quick change hook length, and I'm using 0.15 hook length line to a size 14 wide gape hook, good strong hook. Should I hook a barbel or a great big bream, that will cope with them very, very adequately. And it's so simple. The whole rig is really, really simple.
I've set up 2 rods, a CR10 13 foot feeder number 3 and a 14 foot feeder number 3. So they're rods that are perfectly designed for river fishing with bigger feeders like what we're using today. Both the rods are supplied with 3 carbon tips. There's a 2, 3 and 4 ounce. And on the 13 foot I'm using a 2 ounce, and on the 14 foot I'm using a 3 ounce tip. Basically I wanted to match the tips to the feeders and the distance that I was fishing today. The reels are both CS8s in the 4000 size, so they're a wonderful reel for fishing with heavier feeders like this, and they've got plenty of cranking power, very smooth with a really nice drag. The line I've used is 8-pound Daiwa sensor, which has a diameter of 0.26 millimeters, and sounds heavy 8-pound, but you need a tough, reliable, robust reel line, and that certainly is. Well, Colin's explained the fundamentals about his rig, and sounds like it's very similar to mine. I'm using a bolt rig, so I've got the feeder running on this link swivel on top of a loop, and it's stopped by this swivel with a bead. That's a Drennan bead swivel, and then I've got a gripper stop situated above the nut. Now it's a really good rig because it's very simple, it doesn't tangle, but most importantly for me, it does give you a great bolt rig effect. But if I am to get snagged whilst I'm paying a big fish, the swivel can pull over the nut and move that up. So I've got a chance of the feeder pulling out the snag and then landing the fish. If you fish that swivel within the loop, it can't go any further, and that's when you might experience problems with the hook length snapping as the fish cracks you off against the snag. Selecting the right feeder can be difficult, and I've basically used 2 different types of feeder when I'm using ground bait and targeting bream and skimmers like we are today. So we've got the plastic style open end feeder, that's a Drennan, and we've got the cage type feeder. Now if I was fishing a shallower peg where I know it's not going to take too long for the feeders to hit the bottom, and maybe when I want the ground bait and loose feed within the ground bait to disperse very quickly, I'll use a cage feeder. And it's important to have them in a variety of different sizes and different weights to cater for different flows and different distances when you're casting. But because I'm fishing on the Severn here, where it's about 12 to 13 foot deep in the middle, I've decided to go for the plastic style open end feeder. A really good tip, particularly when you're using chop worm like we are today, is to tape the feeder up. So I'll have some that are taped up and some that aren't. If I think that the ground bait and loose feed is coming out the feeder before it gets to the bottom, I'll switch over to that feeder with the tape on. When targeting bream and skimmers on powerful rivers like the Severn, it's really important to balance the hook line and hooks very carefully. And today, because I've been changing between different hook baits, I've actually changed the hook size and diameter of hook length accordingly. By far the best bait today has been a whole or half a worm on a size 12 carbon feeder. And you need a decent hook and a strong hook to play skimmers and bream in a powerful flow like this. And I've matched it with 018 DH Pro rig line, which I've been using. And when I fished a smaller hook bait like double or treble maggot, double caster, I've gone down to an 014 millimeter hook length and a size 15 B711 hook. So balanced tackle is so critical when you're fishing on a big powerful river like this. And that looks like a bite and another fish. We've been fishing for a couple of hours and I've got 4 or 5 of these skimmers, and this feels like another one around about 12 ounce to a pound. They're nice fish and they really do kick in the flow. What's interesting is I've tried a variety of different hook baits, double maggot, double caster, but by far the best bait is a whole worm tipped off with a caster. These fish seem to be really greedy today, and it's helping me be a bit more selective. On the maggot and castor I've been getting some smaller perch, even a couple of daddy rough. So I think I'm going to persevere with that worm hook bait. The actual ground bait that you're using when you're bream fishing on a river like this is so important. And I like to take some good time and care when I'm mixing my ground bait at the start of the day. And a good tip for you is I'll keep my ground bait in a plastic bag during the session, so I can keep it nice and fresh. It's not out in the sunlight, it's not getting wet if it rains. And I'll just take out the amount I need and put it in a 3-pint tub like this. And maybe after a while I start to think the ground bait looks a bit tired and a bit clogged up. I'll throw that away and get some fresh ground bait out. The actual ground bait I've used is a 3rd Bait-Tech Pro Natural Bream, which is a lovely sweet mix and one that's really proven for catching bream. And I've mixed that with a 1/3 of this Bait-Tech Pro Feeder ground bait. It's a lovely mix that doesn't clog up, it disperses very nicely, but I can mix it quite firm as well, so that it means that I can get the ground bait down to the bottom through the feeder. And I add a 1/3 of good quality brown crumb into that mix, which I just think is absolutely unbeatable when you're bream fishing. So an extra tip that relates to not making the ground bait clog up in the feeder is I don't like to keep my casters in water like you often do to stop them from turning during the day. So a bit like the ground bait, I'll keep the casters in the bag so the air can't get to them, and then take out the casters as and when I need them, put them in a small pint tub like this, and then obviously I can add my chopped worm to it. So it just means that the ground bait that I'm feeding with the casters and chopped worm isn't clogging up. And you'll know if that's happening because when you come to reel in, some of the ground bait and bait will be stuck in your feeder. You definitely don't want that to be happening. You want the feeder to take the bait down to the bottom and disperse it quickly on the bottom. We talked about how important using chopped worm can be as a proven attractor for bream and skimmers. And a good tip when you're targeting slightly bigger fish on a good day is not to chop your worms up too small. So I'll just give them a few cuts like that, and it means that I'm feeding some substantial pieces of worm. Definitely what you need to be doing when you're fishing a river and you're targeting bigger fish. If it was fishing really hard, then I might chop that up into almost like a soup, so that I'm not feeding the fish but I'm attracting them. And a really good tip as well for your hook bait is actually to select some of those chunks of worm and put them on the hook. It's almost like the fish are getting used to eating those bits of worm that you're feeding rather than actually putting a whole worm on. Well, I'm getting some nice skimmers. I wonder how Colin's getting on down below. Hi Colin.
Right, James.
That doesn't look like a feeder rod.
No mate, no mate. I failed miserably with the feeder, so I put the float rod together, and like any good match angler, thought, well, I've got to catch something, and I caught about 30 or 40 roach in about an hour and a half on the bollow.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and you know, they come in fits and starts. You get half a dozen, and all of a sudden it slows up. But some of them are like close to 12 ounces, and some of them are, you know, sort of smallish ones, you know, 2-3 ounces, this sort of size. But for a bit, it's been Winnebung. You know,
Hey, that looks nice.
and this is what Upton's famous for, as well as its bream, it's roach.
Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
that.
And I thought it's possible to do 8 to 10 pound of fish in a couple of hours. So throw caution to the wind. I set up the 14-foot Cadence #1 and put a 3 gram bollow on it. Give it 3 or 4 pouchfuls of emp to start with. Pouch full of maggots about every other cast. And like I said, they're crawling up the rod. Save the day, as they say.
Absolutely.
You never know what's going to turn up.
No, I don't blame you at all, Cole.
No. It could be bream, and well, Sunday they were catching bream, 3 30-pound weights in the match. Today we can hardly catch a bream, and there's loads and loads of roach there. So
Yeah, I've had 4 or 5 skimmers, but nothing over a pound.
no,
But I'm just hoping, you know, towards the end of the session that we might sneak a couple of nice bream.
well, we could well do. In the recent matches, most of the fish have been caught between 2 and 4 o'clock, so we've still got a chance, and I'm not giving up on it yet. It's still there ready, so hopefully it'll come back out for the last hour, but I'm going to plunder these roach for another 3/4 of an hour or so first.
Well, it looks great fun, Cole. Just tell us a bit about the feeding, you know, how much bait have you fed?
Probably so far, James, I've fed about half a pint. You know, it's judging how the fish go, really. If they
Yeah.
start crawling up the rod, you can give it almost double pouch it if you want to. But I will, in about 2 hours, I reckon I'll have fed a pint and a half, something like that. But so far, only half a pint. But it's going to go in now, and I'll see if I can catch them even quicker still.
And you've been feeding some hemp as well?
Just give it the odd pouch full of hemp, but there are some really nice roach amongst them as well. You know, it is superb fishing, no doubt about it. You know, and I'm being a bit brutal with them to try and get them out quick. So these ones, 6 ounce, 8 ounces a piece, are being lifted. There's one about 8 ounces.
Whoa, Cole! It's a good job it's not a match.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful roach. Show the camera. Yeah, he's got to be 6 ounce, 6 or 8 ounce, yeah. Nice one.
Pristine condition.
And what, you on double maggot?
Double maggot, yep.
Well, you've got me twitching now. I think I wish I'd set my float rod up.
I'm going to give it a pouch full of hemp now. I'll give it 2 pouchfuls of maggot, so just lay it down on the line.
And you're fishing, what, about, I don't know, 4 rod lengths out there?
4 rod lengths out. I'm putting the hemp right round the float,
Yeah.
right on the float, look.
Yeah.
No point putting the hemp anywhere else other than on the float, because the fish will actually finish up in the hemp. Just check it, keep it real tight. You can almost hang back on it, keep the rod up. As long as the duck doesn't take the float.
That's fishing really nicely, isn't it?
Beautiful. It's a Steve Mayer 3 gram finesse bollow, which are the ones we favour a lot down here. These finer tip bollows are, because the 7's just that nice steady pace, they just bang on for this water down here.
And what hook are you using? What size hook?
I've got a Drennan size 16.
There's another fish. What, a Drennan carbon match?
Yeah, carbon match size 16. And it is absolutely alive with them.
Imagine if you'd fished them for 5 hours.
If I'd have fished for 5 hours, I'd have had 20 plus comfortably. You know, 3 hours on the feeder, it was well worth the try, and I'm still not convinced that we can't catch a bream, but I'm doing what I love most, and that's running a float through and catching some roach, and hopefully not that duck.
Well, it's great to watch, Carl. And I think I'm going to go back and give it one last go for the bream.
Well done, James. I'm sure you'll get one.
All right then.
I'll plunder these roach for another half hour, and then I'm going to give it an hour on the big rod for the bream after.
Nice one. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing these roach at the end.
all things that happen at Upton, when you get lots of roach, you also get lots of predators. And that was a pike, and goodbye roach. Hopefully he'll disappear now and I won't get any more trouble. But it's goodbye hook as well.
Colin, what a fantastic and fascinating day that was. And quite contrasting really between what we've caught. I've caught 12 skimmers between 12 ounce and a pound on the feeder, a few small perch, and you've had an amazing day on the roach, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, 3 hours on the bream, and I had one little skimmer and 2 bites, that was the lot. And like I said, I needed a backstop, so I picked up the roach rod, went for the roach, and as soon as I started catching, there was no way I was ever going to put it down. I finished with 70 roach for about 13, 14 pound, and a fabulous catch of fish in just 2 and a bit hours. So great day, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Absolutely, me too, and I can't wait to get back here and have a go for the bigger bream another time.
Great, mate, and I look forward to having you here. Cheers, pal.
Cheers, Colin.
Thanks
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Yeah, cheers.